Hey, scholars. Let's talk about Chapter 15, which is short-term scheduling. First off, what is scheduling? It's the organization of three things: your materials, your people, and your machinery to efficiently meet whatever the demand forecast is. Where the demand forecast come from? We've kind of finishing up here with the S&OP, Sales and Operating Plan, where we got a demand forecast at an aggregate level. S&OP led to the aggregate plan, which told us kind of galactically where we needed to be in terms of our total production. That led to the MRP, Materials Requirements Plan, which tells us more specifically, what are the more specific products that we're going to be producing and what type of material inventory do we need to make sure that we're ready to produce those when the time comes. Well, now the time has come, and we're no more than 4 weeks out from scheduling the production runs. And so we need to get ourselves organized around those production runs. And that's what the short-term forecast is all about. Short-term schedule is all about. Now, the short-term schedule is, of course, part of the 9th OM decision, which is scheduling. We're getting towards the end here, and this is no less critical than any of the others. A lot of the scheduling that's done today, of course, is computerized and done with automated scheduling systems. As I said in class, even 15 years ago when I was doing scheduling for over 300 phone reps at Citicorp, we used an automated system for that. And we broke it into batches, so we had teams of 15. And we would schedule teams of 15. It wasn't done at an individual level, so it just made it more manageable. And operation managers around the globe do things like that to make their scheduling more efficient. The one thing that I want to make sure you take away on scheduling is what I call bottleneck math. And what bottleneck math is all about is scheduling your operation for the highest point of profitability. Most operation managers, when they look at the challenge of what am I going to, if they've got limited resources, which often you do, not always, but often you do have limited resources. So you've got to decide, am I going to produce A or am I going to produce B? What's the right thing to do? Well, the math in doing that is called bottleneck math. Your bottleneck is the choke point. It's where your resource is limited the most, or where it's limited. And what most operation managers do, they would just say, okay, what are my products with the highest margin? I'm going to produce those, and we'll let the rest fall where they may. And that makes sense, but it doesn't really make sense, because if you think about one of the things we've learned in class is that idle capacity is a disaster. So if you focus on just the highest level of profitability, you may be idling a lot of your other equipment and not, in fact, maximizing profitability. So what I want you to think about is maximizing your profitability by understanding the profitability at the bottleneck. This is in my book. It's this book here. And essentially what the math is you go through and you have to know what your margins are by product. Of course, margins are revenue minus cost of goods sold, which is a variable cost, equals your gross margin. Take some operating expenses away from that. Often salaries, for instance, wind up as an operating expense below the gross margin line. So other expenses too can come out of that to come up with your margin that you'll use for the analysis I'm going to talk about here. So you've got a margin by product, and then you need to know how much time it takes at the bottleneck. So how much of your capacity at the bottleneck is each one of those products that you could produce. How much does it take? So maybe it's 2 minutes for product A up to 10 minutes for product B at the bottleneck. And then what you do is you say, okay, what's my profitability per unit at the bottleneck, minute in this case. And so how do you calculate that? That's just the margin divided by the amount of time at the bottleneck. So maybe it's $5 is the margin, and maybe it's 10 minutes at the bottleneck. So your margin is 50 cents. So you're looking at then the margins at the bottleneck. And then what you do is you compare the margin at the bottleneck across the products that you can produce, And then from there, you prioritize your production run. So it's going to be based on the highest margin at the bottleneck. And that's the first product that you're going to produce, is that one, because it gets you the highest, you're going to get the most throughput that way. And then, of course, the second production run you're going to do is you're going to take a look at the next highest margin at the bottleneck. You of course have to take into account setup time and setup costs and things of that nature, but that's all factored into the equation. We figure out then again what the margin is at the bottleneck, we make the production run accordingly, and we maximize profit then. So that's how we schedule our machinery at when there's a time of limited resources and we have to decide what we're going to produce. Read the chapter. There's other things in it. One in particular is the assignment method, which is on page 609, but it's very close to what I just described.